So thank you for joining us today for Domestic Departures. This is what we call our research convening, which happens every 2 years as a way of marking, I suppose, not necessarily completion, but some sort of way of sharing the work that happens through our research grants program. I think this year's convening is really bringing together people whose work helps us think about what we're experiencing in the present. Do any of us feel that we really have a right to our land, that we can feel safe, that it will last forever, be there for our future generations? In a time of siege, all we can offer is a multiplicity of perspectives and positions that are, in fact, rooted in precarity. We can learn from those who walk the earth, those who have lost their homes, and those who have never felt at home. Over the last 2 years, our team, Shama Nair in particular, and our research grantees, who you will all hear from today, have formed a sort of virtual community of thinkers who have collaborated extensively to bring together this convening. They've elected to disseminate their work through displays, workshops, and both experimental and performative presentations. They encourage you, as you will experience today, and through their projects, to get closer to and to learn from the ground itself. Thank you for joining us, and I will let Shama tell you more about each of their projects. So the way... Sorry. And we'll introduce each project before they present their work, just so that it stays present with you.
Hello, everyone. Sorry. So to echo what Nada just shared, so our research grant awardees and their projects have really sort of urged us to pay attention to the ground beneath our feet and where we choose to stay, pause, and settle. So our gathering today, in a way, tries to encapsulate that. Just sort of the idea of being on ground and also occasionally moving and shifting is needed. So please make yourself comfortable. We have a large space, so make use of it. And yeah, so as the first two presentations will take place right here, but after that we will begin to move a little, and I'll step in and guide you when we arrive at that. Our first presentation for the day, this land is ours, yours, whose, with Khalda El Jack, Zainab Gaafar, Hind Abdelbaghi, in conversation with Kutuf El is what we sort of begin with today. They also had a workshop a little earlier this morning, which sort of gave rise to certain conversations and exchanges, which they'll share a little more about, which they also sort of have some tactile manifestation of, which I invite you to come and see. But to share a little bit about what they've been sort of thinking about over the past year. So the war that broke out in Sudan, halfway through their project, separated these collaborators across three different continents, 4 different countries, and most importantly, separated them from what they refer to as their homeland. They had to shift gears to rethink what land means and signifies during moments of violence. The exploration aims to artistically document stories on how land in 3 settlements of South Khartoum is spoken about and related to, thinking through land as an entity in itself, through its composition and its ecology. And also thinking about how violence unmakes our relationship with land. Khalda, Naima, who unfortunately is now present with us this time, Zainab and Hind, all part of the project. They're architects and urban researchers trying to closely investigate social justice, community resilience, public policy, and equity through urban studies. We're also joined by Kutuf El who's a writer with a special interest in the poetics of the archive. In 2016, she co-founded Locale, a platform to exhibit, design, and collaborate with artists. But yeah, without any further ado, I would like to invite you all onto stage. Not stage, we don't have a stage this time, but just gather and come closer in. But yeah, thanks.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us at this convening to look at the work that these researchers have been undergoing over the last couple of years. And before we even get started, first and foremost, I want to take a moment to thank you and acknowledge the gravity of the work that you guys have done in this kind of very particular moment and under the unbelievable circumstances that Sudan is undergoing, and the rupture that you have kind of had to face while undergoing your work since the break of the war in April 2023. Your research project kind of not only has answered and responded to the ongoing kind of situation, but for you to take on that kind of toll while yourselves are being displaced is something I have to kind of commend, because it is a level of kind of dedication that I myself have not been able to kind of conjure. So first of all, thank you for continuing the work, and thank you for continuing to shed light on everything that is going on in our homeland. I'll let you expand on kind of this rupture on your own by telling us maybe a little bit and further contextualizing your work and your research by asking maybe you individually to speak about where it is that you began and where it is that you think you've landed with the project. Who wants to go first?
Okay, thank you for having us. Just a note, Nerma is on that computer. So she's virtually with us, the fourth person working with us. Yeah, so I think she can see all of you. Yeah, so I think when we started the project 2 years ago, we approached it from this urban researchy kind of mindset. We wanted to work on one settlement at that time. It was only one. And we were just researching it from one perspective, which was we were looking at certain settlements that used to be urban villages that got regulated and joined to the city. And we wanted to see what happened through that process, how land how land was distributed, how people found home, the gray areas, things like that. And then shortly after the war started, new layers surfaced on violence, on city militarization, things that was always there, we never saw. So we then started to incorporate that a lot. But the more we work on this, the more we reflect on our own experiences away from home, being displaced and all of that, we realize it's more about the people, about the stories, about how people experience all of it. And through that, we kind of found ourselves trying new methods of storytelling, of conducting research, of working with each other. So it's it's a journey that is entirely more or less reflected in this work. Yeah, I think so.
Hello. Yes. Okay. It is working. I guess to add to what Zainab is saying, actually, because maybe some of you haven't been up yet to the exhibit, we do have some of these stories that we're talking about in these booklets. We will have to ask you, sorry, to not take them home. We only have a few for now. But no, please feel free to skim through them as we're talking, just to get a sense. So maybe to add on to what Zainab was saying and to what Qutuf was asking as well. It was a conscious decision one, for Zainab and I to work on this project together, but then also to have Hind and Naima with us in the project, because in the settlement that we were focusing on before, just before this project, we had kind of this intensive critical mapping workshop that we were doing with the community, and so it was very grounded practice. But then after the war and then the four of us being together, the space of the project really allowed us to process a bit what was going on. And so there were a lot of questions, there were a lot of gaps in between where we just felt like we couldn't even comprehend what was happening because people were looking for visas or were moving around. And so we did a lot of reading, a lot of just conversations. We depended a lot on Miro and Zoom to kind of bring the distance closer together. But then eventually, to add to what Zainab was saying, then the story, we can be super angered by the violence that is imposed on people, but then we wanted to center, especially during this time, what that violence actually means. And when we started to follow the stories, we realized that for some communities in the areas that we have been focusing on, this violence isn't something that people have only been enduring now during the war, but it's been decades of violence that they've been going through. And so focusing like situating this within a broader history, I think was also a tool for us to try to understand.
Do you want to add anything?
Nothing in particular, but for me, the process of this whole research started as me being a trainee. I was just a trainee in this intensive placemaking workshop or training program. And by the end of the training, I was lucky to continue working on this project. And then at just that transition, war happened. And we literally stopped working for like maybe around 2 months or so because everyone was navigating a new area to settle. So we scattered around, we moved a lot. And then, as Khalda and Zainab said, we shifted our perspectives because of the whole conflict going on. And we realized that we needed to include more elements and more aspects in this research. But we were very distant from each other physically, and even the time zones were different, the schedules, and all of the stuff. It was challenging, actually, to meet and to negotiate and to decide what we are going to do or what direction are we taking and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, for me, as someone who's always worked from the outside in, I can relate to the kind of experience of like taking things into the cyberspace and creating that third space to reflect research and to reflect things going on the ground. But I can imagine it was a very abrupt rupture for you, especially Zainab, because I know you worked so much on the ground, and the work that you do with mapping was so much, is so community-based. And so I obviously commend, but also deeply kind of sympathize with the shift that you've had to make. But to contextualize things a little bit more for everyone here and before they get up to see the work upstairs, maybe to name the localities and their history would be a little bit necessary for us to understand why you chose them, why you chose to work with the communities that live in those spaces, and what kind of differentiates them from the greater Khartoum capital.
So we started with El Lab. I'm a PhD researcher, and these are some of the topics that I focus on. And so Shigellab was the first settlement that we had gone into, and knowing the work that Zainab and the Studio Urban in Khartoum do, we decided to collaborate on this first fieldwork just to see what it means to enter into this space. And In Khartoum, the way in which the city is divided is we have what historically used to be a green belt. So it was a forest that demarcated kind of the extent to which the city would expand into. And in the 70s, throughout till about the 90s, there was a civil war that was going on between the south and the north, and a lot of millions were displaced. So that was also deemed at the time kind of the largest displacement crisis in the world. And people then got displaced into the city. And the way the government dealt with that massive influx of people was that they put them south of the belt. So in Arabic, that translates to Janub al-Hizam. And so Janub al-Hizam became a territory that generally I've been quite interested in the research. But on top of the government kind of placing people away, there were already people living there, right? So you have all these agro-pastoral communities that were living alongside the White Nile, that then suddenly were also being displaced without physically being removed from their context, but being dispossessed kind of their relationship with the land, which really had to do with these seasonal ties with, with the Nile, harvesting, their pastoral lenses. But then you get kind of this more hardcore land logics that get imposed by the government. And so Shigilab was an interesting site one, because we got to know the people that were there, and they were kind of an entry point. And it was in the aftermath of the floods. So it was a different type of crisis. So the floods in 2020, where then there were different local groups and community efforts and tried to mitigate the flood. And then the issue around land was something that came up but was never explicitly addressed. And so that's kind of why we became more and more frequent in the space. And so Al-Shigilab was the entry point, and then the other two settlements that we look at just north of it, so Al-Kalakla and then Al-Shajara, the three have this shared history of being agro-pastoral villages which have been impacted by urbanization, but have also been some of the settlements that have been heaviest hit by the war. And we found out later that it's because there's such an embeddedness of military infrastructure as well in these settlements. So that's a bit how we came to work across them.
Yeah, and I think you guys kind of allude to this violence in the booklets and in your work upstairs, which is the violence of being displaced or dispossessed without kind of military force, without war being at play, but then negotiating that in the greater kind of capital and having to do these like land reclamation works and things like that don't really resonate when there is no brute force. And when there's no need for anyone that lives outside of that area to kind of make it a focal point. But there are other types of violence, I think, that you guys also allude to, very specific to Janub al-Hizam, or this area south of the belt, which is very much kind of conveyed in your work as well, which is the work of the revolution. And that area specifically of Janub al-Hizam having kind of really strong ties to resistant committees, having really strong ties to emergency rooms, and being kind of at the forefront of leading civil protests. And is there anything kind of that during specifically the workshops that you've done before the work shifted online that reflects that? And I think there was a moment that everyone felt post-revolution in 2019 of the ability to reclaim, and that's where you guys kind of came in and started doing the work. So maybe we can reflect on that a bit, and how the war then kind of comes again and erases or takes or does the work of thieving, right?
Yeah, okay. There's a lot of layers to that question, but I think there is an element of reconstructing, rebuilding that we kind of became used to. You mentioned the revolution, you mentioned the war, but there have been other incidents where we had to do that as well. I mean, political changes, economical issues that hit the entire country. And kind of that's part of the dynamic that helped us deal slightly with the impact of war, because when you're used to question everything, break it down, rebuild it again, because the structures you're used to are no longer there. Similar to actually how we work together. We have the same pragmatic issues every workspace have, working hours, time, salaries, everything. But then research, methodologies, everything we know, and then certain changes happen and you have to rethink all of that. You have to think how we speak to each other. Why do we actually work with each other? Does it what's the essence of the type of conversations we have with each other? And that's kind of what helps us develop new methodologies, new ways, new solutions, new ideas. And I feel that's kind of was a continuous thing, even before the revolution. I would say since the past 10 so years, we've been repetitively doing that. Of course, nothing at the scale of the last one, but still. So it has an interesting impact. I feel like not flavor, but like touch to the way we produce things eventually. That the process itself becomes a key thing to our creation process.
How did you find kind of the communities in those spaces laid claim to land during kind of those different moments in time, and what their relationship shifted to, or what it became post-war in your conversation? So for example, during your workshops, when you were there on the ground doing kind of this work with them that almost felt like a rejuvenation or a reclamation, but kind of now us and them having to be removed from that space under a completely different context, what was their kind of claim to the land after that?
I think so we all come from backgrounds of being architects and urbanists, and I think part of the workshop, so the fact that we were able to be present in space and see the conversations that were happening there and what these cycles actually look like in this context helped us a lot then in our shift to the online world. Because when we were doing the mapping workshop, we were also confronted by the reality that the map, the map or the representation of space means very different things to very different people. And in a situation or neighborhoods where there's already so much precarity, whether you don't know whether or not if you get displaced from your house because of the flood, if you will be able to go back to that house. And then we show up as like architects and urbanists, and the imaginary goes to, we work at a municipality and we have some authority over how this land is distributed. And so there was a lot of deconstruction in what the map means, what the drawing means, what it's supposed to represent, what our role then is in these spaces. And that was it was a difficult engagement, but it was also super rewarding, because there's just some things that if you haven't experienced it, it's difficult to associate particular logics to. And so I think that was part of the thing also that we brought into our process now, is about, okay, well, if we're thinking about what the tangible outcome or what representation means, how do we move away from the map as representation? And are we really, like in the stories that have been told to us, are we really paying attention to what is being told, or are we processing it through our own lens? Because, yeah, there's, in a lot of cases, people aren't waiting for somebody to come say, they're already doing the recovery and they're already doing the reconstruction, and it's more about, okay, like how can we support ongoing efforts? And so trying to capture that within some of these narratives was then what was important, and that's then where this whole discussion about land, why specifically here, how people are speaking about these relationships becomes super important.
No, that definitely does, yeah. I'm going to take the conversation a bit to you, Hind, because in the booklets you write about this history or this legacy of displacement that can be associated with a certain people or a certain kind of ethnic or even just land or areas, specific areas in Sudan that you feel is kind of hereditary, that put a really heavy weight on the process of you and your family leaving your home. And if you can maybe touch a bit on this, the movement of the people of Halfa Jadida or New Halfa, and then what that looks like now in their dispossession from Khartoum and from their new homes that they've kind of moved into post-war, and this symbolic idea of home and our relationship to home and homeland, right?
There was a moment when we were leaving our house, in like a week post-war. My mom was locking the door, and she was saying that her grandmother went through the same process because of their land and in North, North Sudan. They were evicted because of the construction of the high dam. And they created the largest artificial lake because of that. And there were a lot of people got displaced because of that incident. And the old people at that time couldn't let go of their keys, the keys of their homes, basically. So I still hold my key from my home with me. I take it everywhere. So I was reflecting on that while I was writing and illustrating all of these stories from my story and other people's stories as well. And it's just like history was repeating itself in different lenses. The cause was different, but the result is the same. And looking into the history of Sudan, there was so many similar situations happened, and because of a lot of different reasons. So all of us Sudanese, you would find similar story in the background of that person. You would definitely find something. So yeah, it was when we are going out of our home, trying to find somewhere else, I was like, yeah, people were chill somehow because, yeah, we will find other area to settle in because other peoples did before and before and before and before. It was strange because the situation was terrifying at that time, but still people had the strength to move out and find new areas.
Thank you for sharing. Maybe I'll ask you guys to speak a little bit about the workshop that we've done earlier and kind of what you had hoped to get out of it and how you approached it, and what it means to kind of situate your research in greater context and conversation with the works that are happening here in the space, but also the people that have come into the workshop carrying kind of their own histories and stories. Do you want to tell us a bit more about the workshop?
Yeah, so I think part of the process of working on this was the storytelling, everything from how we shifted our methodology, but also us sharing our stories. And with that, we felt a big urge to speak to other people. we felt we really need to talk to as many people as we can, because we felt that there was a lot that connect us through these narratives than when we started. There was a lot to be said. There's a lot to be shared. So kind of this was the first logic to it, was that we wanted people to share. We wanted to, as part of our ability to create a space for that, so anyone could share anything that they feel is relevant. And there is, I could maybe explain a bit the workshop, and you two could explain a bit what's on it. So we've been joined earlier today by lovely ladies. They're all women who all came and looked around the exhibition, heard what we've had to say, and then took a moment to reflect on their own stories, on their own lives. And if the exhibition on top, we draw two main topics. One is memory and belonging, and the second one is violence and displacement. But we also center the aspect of resilience and resistance between them, and how it's a continuous state as well. So we've asked them to kind of contribute from their own narrative, stories or thoughts that fall underneath these same topics as well. I don't know if you want to maybe mention any of the...
I mean, just to add, somebody earlier was saying that it's interesting. So we cut up random shapes, and people could select whatever piece of this map that they wanted to draw. And one of the participants had mentioned it's very interesting that we selected pieces that were adjacent to one another, extremely by chance. And you were reflecting on how that has to do with how we cannot exist in isolation. And so a part of doing this exercise was, well, finding a nice activity to center again this whole question about who draws the map, these maps that are kind of spread everywhere, and what goes on this map. And so in being confronted with the reality that violence, but also resistance, but also these feelings of memory and belonging don't exist in isolation, but they kind of act in conversation with one another. It was really interesting to see how in everyone sharing their pieces, there were elements, for example, that were quite common. So I think a lot of people are living in the diaspora. Well, everyone here was in the diaspora. But how the landscape, for example, was an element. So trees became something that made or reminded people of rootedness, whether here or elsewhere. Water, but then also there were discussions about how the sensation of memory and belonging is something we take with us irrespective of the physicality of what home means. And so I think it was just nice to take, and a nice way to get to know each other, by taking things that are quite present in the stories that we've shared from Sudan and from the people that have generously shared them with us, to then be able to bring it into this space and actually find some common threads. And I do believe that if we exist in a world today where we're able to convene here today, people from very different backgrounds, and to be able to come together and see the relations or similarities between one another, especially during these times, then that's extremely, extremely important. And to be able to move from that space is super significant. Otherwise, it's really a super lost opportunity. So we're hoping that at least in an activity like this, also art is an amazing way to do that.
I mean, yeah, there were so many great reflections. I attended kind of the second half of the workshop, but there was so much to be said about, and I'll point to you because you mentioned this earlier, but kind of the distinction between home and homeland, and what we impose on objects and visuals and materials. from our own kind of sensibilities of what home is, or our ruptures from home, or our distance from home. And we also kind of talked about how violence makes home bigger, because then it moves it to a space of living above the land and living within us and living in our minds, and kind of expanding that and visualizing it and seeing it and imposing on everything that we encounter. And on visualizing, I just wanted to kind of ask you guys about the process, and maybe you're familiar with this because you're architects, but as researchers, visualizing your research and kind of manifesting it in a way that is tactile and visible for other people seems like a very kind of difficult thing for me. So I'd really like to hear about your experience with that.
It was really difficult for us to. It's not really our style of communication. We had to awaken the artist child in us. Used a lot of like imagine words and things like that. Yeah, we went through a very long process of us actually ending to produce art. We tried different methods and processes. We looked at how comic artists do things. We looked at how stories are built. We tried to deconstruct it like typically what architects do. And eventually sort of everyone, while looking, while listening.
With the other grantees as well, like seeing,
Sorry?
like seeing how the other grantees also were approaching.
Yeah.
The other grantees. You know, just like also drawing inspiration from how the other grantees were approaching the artistic component was quite helpful as well.
Yeah, and we all tried different styles as well. We wanted to know which one actually works for us, and eventually we all sort of landed to this collage, mixed media, digital artwork, physical artwork things, and I think because once we established that this is our process. When we did the interviews, we kind of, as we spoke to the people, images would come to our heads, so we know this is what we want to show. This is what we felt could be, reflected. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has a different experience.
I hope you get a chance to read the booklets or see them, but even the styles of writing was different because we designated each area or region for a person or two to illustrate what they want, they can visually, and also what cannot be visualized was written, story telling based or facts or maybe quotes from books or history articles or whatever, but it's really diverse. I hope you can see and read them and see the visuals. Also, the visualization element was, as Zainab said, went through really transformative, I would say, period. We started as we want to create a comic book, and how we as architects we don't know how to do that. We do tell stories, but in a very structured way, measured way, I would say. So, like letting go of all of that framing and trying to just convey what it's on our minds, or try to convey the other people's stories was very, very difficult. Very.
Yeah,
No, I can imagine.
There are 4 different booklets, by the
Yeah.
way.
There's only one in circulation now, or
Yeah, every booklet talks about a certain perspective. This is our land, this is your land, this is whose land, the main titles. And the 4th booklet talks about our own reflections and stories. Yeah.
Thank you, Khalda. Thank you, Hind. Thank you, Naima, for joining us virtually. Hopefully, next time you'll be here in person. Thank you all for taking the time to listen in and to engage with these researchers and their work. And I urge you to look through their booklets and have a look upstairs once you've moved from the remaining conversations. And I look forward to hearing all about the remaining work. Thank you all.